Yeah, so the way I'm trying to do this here, I was tempted just to like start recording like immediately because I don't know, my feeling is like maybe this kind of like conversation we're having right now, like maybe if we just like ease into it a little bit, like you know what I'm saying? Like I'm not saying what I'm saying right now will be necessarily on the pod, but I'm just thinking like, you know, if we kind of ease into it, you know what I mean? But
Yeah, that's I feel like typically like, there's always like 5 or 6 minutes of banter pre-recording and then, like, oh shit, I gotta introduce you. And then, we just jump back right into whatever we're talking about before change the line of questioning.
right, yeah, I mean, I don't want to do one of these pods that's like very like, formal, like, hey, I'm here with blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Like I want to try to be maybe a little bit more like casual and approachable, I guess. But you know, there is an element that like maybe that's not up to me. Like maybe, maybe you're just born with it, or maybe it's Maybelline. I don't know. But anyways, I'm here with Eddie Raymond. I said that right, right? Just checking.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, cool, cool. You probably know him from Strangers Fanzine or Strangers Publishing. Um, and Strangers, in my opinion, has been doing extremely interesting work and it's in sort of this space as like a Kickstarter crowdfunding publisher. And I really believe it's like one of the most exciting ones to keep an eye on, of that field of sort of, it's almost like a new genre of publishing now, which is like crowdfunding publishing. Um, and I watch that very closely. So I think Strangers is doing, some of the most exciting work in that area. But am I right about that, Eddie, or is it not exciting?
I think what I'm doing is exciting. It's funny when you've mentioned a couple of times where you're like, oh, you're a Kickstarter publisher or like a crowdfunder publisher. I never thought of myself in that light. It was kind of one of those things where like the kickstarting was sort of a means to get to that next level of like, I can print floppies of some of the work I'm doing, and I can do even some smaller like 100-page perfect bound books. But it was sort of like with Diva, it was like, well, I don't, I don't have $30,000 laying around to print
Right.
this beautiful graphic novel, and that was kind of the next step, and it was really successful. And then I was fortunately been able to replicate the success twice more, and it's become a nice option for some of these larger books that make sense to be under strangers, and these are stories that creators want to tell, and they want to tell them with strangers, but they can't do it by themselves. Or same thing, like I don't have $10,000+ to get 1,000 copies of this 200-page graphic novel printed.
Hmm.
So it's just been a nice extra way of doing it.
So when
Yeah.
you say diva, you're talking about like Dynamite Diva by
Jasper, yep.
Jasper Jubinville.
Yeah, that was the first one we kickstarted, and prior to that I had done, I think, like a couple smaller perfect bound books. Like one was like a 44-page little thing, and that was Trenchcoat by Jake Mashin. And then
Hmm.
I think by the time we did the Dynamite Diva Kickstarter, Dear Mother was out, but I don't remember. But that was another, like, that was, I think, the second perfect bound book we did. And then obviously again, Diva's full color, almost 300 pages, so that's a whole different kind of step up.
Hmm. Full color, 300 pages. You said.
I think yeah, I think that was a total like, or like 250 or something like that. But um it was the first, that was the first like large project that we were kind of taking on. And like we did a couple of thousand copies of it, and they're still sitting on a bunch behind me that were have been moving for a while. And that was sort of the key, like, or sort of the intention there. Like both Jasper and I wanted that book to be in print for a while. And it's been a year and a half, I think. So and it stuck around.
Hmm. So that's pretty huge for like, you know, in this indie publishing venture to be like, you know, in the 200 page range. I mean, that's getting up there. And I mean, it's not just getting up there, it's like very expensive in terms of printing it, right?
It was, and it was the first like granted one, it kind of helped as like a jumping off point for other things. Like before that, we were doing, you know, a couple hundred copies here and there of things, and once kind of Diva came out, it was I think people started to take Stranger a little more seriously because it was the first like, hey, this is a real book that not that the others weren't real books, but just was like a big sizable graphic novel. Um, and that kind of, you know, coming off that, I also sort of started taking it a little more seriously. Like, okay, I can, you know, I have other larger projects I can take on, and you know, that idea of putting together a large book was less intimidating. And now it's, you know, now it's just kind of all of our books, not necessarily are 200 pages, but like I'm kind of pushing everything to be perfect bound, and you know, whether they're graphic novella size or full length graphic novels, it's kind of become the norm in terms of, I guess, now going forward. These last couple of releases were sort of in that graphic novella format, and some of the more of the future stuff is as well.
Hmm. Sorry, I'm distracted because I'm just looking through like all the stuff on strangerspublishing.com, just seeing
No, you're
like,
fine.
the there's a distinction between like as we were just talking about like before I hit record, like there's sort of like you're kind of operating as like you're like a publishing company, but then you're also sort of like a little bit of like a retailer, right? Because there's like books here that like you wouldn't necessarily say that you're like publishing, like just off the top of my head, like Action Hospital by like Dave Baker. Like it's not technically like a stranger's book, but it's like sort of like strangers is sort of like almost a little bit of like an online comic book, like indie comic book shop. Like, is that like a fair statement?
Yeah, and the distro slash like the shop came before the publishing. It was kind of, I don't even remember how the distro started, but I think like when I started the fanzine, it was getting a good amount of attention. And I originally intended for the distro to be a place where some of my friends that were international, like they couldn't, you know, shipping to the States from international is really expensive. So I was like, well, why
Right.
don't you ship me 100 copies, and you know, I can just sell them for you and settle it up that way. And that turned out pretty successful right off the bat. And then, you know, like most things in my life, I just kind of get overexcited and then start kind of growing a bit too rapidly with it. So it went from like, you know, a few of my friends international, like, you know, Adam Falp and Jordan Berry Brown and Joel, who does Fortress, to, you know, me grabbing domestic stuff and backing
Or like
Kickstarters and et cetera,
Decadence
et
is
cetera.
probably another one of those, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you know, I worked with Lando, and I was like, hey, like you know, let me get 30 copies of every one of your titles. And, you know, there's not many places in the States that sell Decadence. So
Right.
you know, it was a place for them to be like, hey, if you're in America and you want this for, you know, an affordable price point, like Strangers has it all. And that's kind of, it's funny because that's where it originally started as a distro. And that now that like the publishing has taken off and it's kind of become the main focus, like that's where I've started reverting the distro back to. Like I'm not really picking up any domestic titles anymore. I'm more doing it for like, again, for Fortress from Australia, and like Cosmic Slop, who Jordan's in Ireland. Like
Oh,
they'll,
interesting.
yeah, they'll do, you know, they'll send me 100 or 200 copies, and I just help them kind of be a US point of distribution for them. Just recently I got a book in from Mikel Lopez, A Cold Place by the Shore. And it was kind of the same thing. You know, he actually reached out to me to publish it. But I didn't really have the bandwidth for it. So I was like, look, if you can, you know, if you want me to be a place in the States that has it, like I'm more than welcome to. I was just can't really afford at the moment to have it as an official Strangers title, but I'll still support it nonetheless and carry in the shop. And if retailers want to order it, I'm happy to fulfill on your behalf. So it's a nice gesture, and I jokingly call it Strangers and Friends. So it's official Strangers titles and stuff that like I think culturally makes sense within what Strangers is trying to go for. So
Right. Like it fits sort of the uh
ethos, I never know what word to
yeah,
put to it. I hate saying like, oh, it
I wanted to
matches the
say
brand.
brand, but maybe like maybe people wouldn't love that phrasing. But
I feel like such an asshole every time I talk about like when every time I say like, oh, it has to, it doesn't feel on brand. It's like, come on, I'm not a marketing company, like, but
yeah,
it's
but I will say like there's a big like reaction against that kind of language. And I get where people are coming from, but like, these things, marketing is not inherently evil. Like it's,
no,
it's it makes sense to have sort, and I think you by the way, like have one of the strongest ones of these. Like it makes sense to have sort of like a brand uh like vision of like what you want to publish. Like, you kind of can't be everything for everyone, because then you're sort
no,
of just all over the map. Like you kind of have to carve out like, all right, what is strangers going to represent? And it's probably not, certain types of books, like, which, what I mean, there's a certain strangers like, I don't know what you'd call it, like maybe like indie aesthetic, maybe like comics like with an X, perhaps, like, um I don't know, like, I correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you're shooting for like kind of like an underground comics kind of feel.
it's changed a little bit over time. I feel like when I first started, I always had a vision of like what I wanted it to be, but like I didn't have I didn't know the creators that were doing kind of what was in my head, and like so I was working with my friends and people I knew. So, and at the time it was a lot of creators that were doing more of that like I call it like American indie, or like that 60s underground influence. And then
Right.
as strangers started getting more attention, specifically with certain books that were I felt a little more in line with what I wanted strangers to always be, that world of like the world of what I always wanted to be kind of opened up to me. And like I look at stuff from the first year versus where we're at now, and there's a handful of titles that I still think like fully sit in line, like this is what Strangers is all about. Like I look at Trench Coat by Jake Mash, and I look at God Bless the Machine by Connor McCann, and like those were some of the first six or so titles that I put out. And like I still think to this day, like those are going to be the titles that I think really represent what Strangers is about. And even stuff like Jungle Land, and um I think the biggest one in terms of like not necessarily pivotal, that sounds a bit dramatic, but like the first one I was like really like this is exactly what I want, was when I put out Disco Levante by Garish. It just had like Tetsuo Nihei, the creator of like Blam and Knights of Sidonia, is a big influence on me, and like that's also a big influence on Garish. And to publish a Western comic that had this sort of like dark sci-fi manga kind of influence to it was really, that kind of summed up everything I was looking for. And kind of working with Garish and some of these creators that were also influenced by manga and kind of sci-fi Euro comics, like that has since opened up exactly what I want, which is exactly that. Like, what's that? Number Five. Like, you ever heard of that book?
No. Number 5.
Yeah, it's by Taiyo Matsumoto, and he created like Black and White and Sunny and a handful of other like sort of arty manga that's like still put out through Viz, and was still very accessible, but like it has such a unique style to it. But he did this book called Number Five, and like
Okay, I have seen this actually.
yeah, it looks like literally like a manga creator trying to make like European comics. And I like, to me
Hmm.
that's like that's perfect. That's exactly what that's exactly what I want. Or vice versa, European creators trying to, your European comics trying to create manga,
Right.
and like somewhere in the mix of both is exactly where I want it to be. And I finally feel like I have that aesthetic, or whatever you want to call it, with strangers.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm giving away here that I'm not like the biggest expert about like European comics or whatever, but like
I'm not either
just
by any means.
right, yeah. I mean, the whole idea of this pod is that it's, a comics podcast for people who like don't really read comics. So that's like easily 99%, probably higher than that of the population, right? So like, you know, sort of like, the idea of the pod is like, uh there's always someone who knows more than you when it comes to this stuff.
Oh,
So
100%.
yeah, I mean, and you sound like you know a lot more about this kind of thing than me, like the European comics, but just looking at like number five, like I could kind of see like a Mobius, you know, kind of style there. But I'm just saying it's kind of funny that like my main touch point for European comics is just like Mobius. You know what I mean? Where,
I'm
you
talking
know,
to you as I'm staring at the Mobius background on my computer, so I'm the
okay, all
same
right,
way.
yeah.
Like, I think most people, though, they've seen a million Mobius images, but like how many have really read anything by Mobius? And
Right.
like it
Right.
is, a lot of the European stuff is very inaccessible for Western, by Western,
Definitely.
American audiences, because it's very wordy, which I don't think a lot of us are used to. Um so like in my head, I was like, well, I want something that has that like really cool, like unique, kind of meticulous European aesthetic, but like has the brevity and the speed and the action of manga. Which, if I had any artistic abilities, maybe that's what I would be doing, but I don't. So I just, am constantly on a hunt for creators that have that kind of
Do you
similar
like
vibe.
kind of like write any of the books, or you know what I mean?
Oh
Like do
no,
you
dude, I have no I have
okay,
no
I gotcha.
I wish. Every time I'm like, I just can't wrap my head around how so many people think of these stories. Like I can't. I never feel like I've never had like an original story thought in my life, which is, it is what it is. I've come
Well,
to
there's an
terms.
argument to be made that they're like, it's like nothing is really original in the sense of like, you're drawing on influences throughout your life. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
No one is just like totally emerges from a vacuum, like you almost can't help it that you're like, your influences and stuff are going to bleed into the work. But um I don't know, like what, before we started talking, I was kind of thinking like, how the podcast is going to go and stuff. And I was kind of thinking like, do you think of it at all like it's almost like a record label? You know what I mean? That you're like trying to seek out like those artists and creators that you think like, uh, you know, like let's compare Strangers to like Virgin Records or something. Like it fits that, Strangers ethos as opposed to like, again, I'm showing my total ignorance. I can't even name any other record company, but
I know.
like,
I was like, I don't even. Yeah,
like Warner Music, it would be, I assume, would be a much different like style than like something at an indie label, for instance. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you think of it like, you know, you're kind of building a like almost like a comics label, I guess,
yeah, and that's kind of. So I came from a music background. Like I played in
Okay,
bands
interesting.
and this and that for most of my teenage years and my early 20s, and I used to book concerts and was very involved in music. So I found a lot of I still find a lot of natural similarities between the comic scene and like underground music scenes. And there is that kind of similar, like I look at some of these underground labels that were like, they put together a certain sound, like, you know, this is a label I don't even care about, but they just happen to be making a documentary now, like that label Elephant Six. They were like an indie label, and like, they, when you said, "Oh, that was the Elephant Six sound," like a lot of people know exactly what you're referring to.
Hmm. Right.
And I'd like to, as you kind of said, like you're like, "Oh, when I think of strangers, I think of X, Y, and Z." Like that's really important to me, is like I want people to know exactly what they're getting into when they pick up a stranger's book, even if the contents look different, even if, the stories are different. Like it has that sort of like, oh, well, I have the same taste as Eddie from Strangers, so I'm very likely going to like this. Like, he loves sci-fi and he loves fantasy and action and, this and that. So I'm probably going to enjoy this. Which thankfully has worked out. Like a lot of people have reached out to me and been like, hey, I love everything you put out, or like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Which, means the world to me. It's always really cool when I meet people that have kind of that same interest as me, and kind of attach themselves to the creators that I work with, which is, the end goal of all of this, right?
Hmm. So what would you say, like what kind of comics, and like were you one of these guys who's like into comics from a really young age, or are you more of a late comics reader,
I
or like
was
what?
super late into it. I've only been
Oh,
into
interesting.
comics for about like 7 years. I got into it in my like early to late 20s.
Oh, interesting.
A couple of
So you're not a
coworkers.
real fan?
No,
No, I'm
no, I'm
kidding.
not. No, I'm a Fairweather fan. A couple coworkers kind of recommended a few things to me, and it
Oh,
just
like
sort of
what?
the I remember I had asked them. I was like, well, at the time I really liked Twilight Zone, and these coworkers they like mainstream comics. So like I was like, well, I really like Twilight Zone. I really like X-Files, and they were like, all right, like you should check out this book called Letter 44. It was like I couldn't even tell you what it's about now. I think it was about like it's the letter that the presidents hand between each other, and this one was like the 44th president giving it to the 45th, and it was revealing like aliens were coming to Earth, and like brace yourself kind of thing.
Huh?
It was, I think, Oni put it out. It was
Charles
Charles.
Soule?
Yes, thank you. He wrote it. I can't remember who did the art on it, but that was the first comic I ever read.
It says here Alberto Jimenez Albuquerque, but I'm not the biggest. Also Guy Major, Dan Jackson. Like this could be a little unreliable because,
Yeah.
as far as I know, it could be there's 10 different artists on this book. So I just want to do a little disclaimer that I'm sorry if I'm not crediting you correctly.
You wrote this book and or drew this book, and we
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
I
could only
always like
imagine
to credit
how.
artists. Like I don't like when I don't like when writers promote a comic and they just have zero mention of the artist or whatever. So I'm just trying to, cover
No,
my
I'm
ass a
I'm
little
with
bit by
you.
saying I'm not,
I know you do a lot of writing, so I hope you don't take this as a dig, but like, I'm
writers suck.
not
No,
even
I'm just
that. Like
kidding.
I'm just
I'm
never
kidding.
like there's never going to be likely a chance that the writer is going to sell the book on me. It's always going to be the artist. So I agree with you. It's always good to kind of call that out. Um, that was like the first comics I read, and then they got me a couple. I always grew up like loving Batman, so I started picking up Batman stuff, and I'd always kind of been into like crime noir. So you know, reading that Batman stuff kind of quickly turned into reading like Brubaker books and some of
Oh
that.
yeah.
Yeah, like
Like
just
what kind of Brubaker books? Like, and by the way, I'm
um
not trying to, just if you remember, like I'm not trying to like put you on the spot or whatever.
no, I'm trying to like what was the long running series that he did with Sean Phillips?
Criminal?
Criminal, thank you.
Yes.
So like Criminal, and then
I just survived another moment, by the way, of this podcast, like people listening, who are like real hardcore comic book people, like if I had got that wrong, they would have been like, oh my God, you
I will
know.
just set it over. You're good.
What's that? No, no, I mean I nailed it this time, but
Next
next
time.
time I might not be so lucky, but I won't edit it. I refuse to edit unless I say something catastrophically bad, but so far that hasn't happened.
Yeah, I think we're okay. And then the big one for me actually that I think was like kind of the shift into indie comics was Jeff Lemire. Like
Oh,
that,
interesting.
yeah, that his
So like
especially
Sweet
his
Tooth or
uh less Sweet Tooth and more like Essex County.
okay.
like his solo stuff was kind of really, it's still like really kind of, I hold it in super high regard. And I was also like a big Black Hammer fan as well. Like, he didn't draw any of that, but like I just think he is a
Right.
masterful storyteller, and it kind of, again, it sort of has that like, it has a brevity to it that I really appreciate in comics, where like he's such a good visual storyteller that you really don't need, a bunch of exhibition or like a ton of words on the page to kind of get the point across. Like, Essex County is rather sparse. It's a big book, but it's rather sparsely written, and like, you still find yourself crying at the end of it. So
Hmm. It's interesting. You were saying before about like a lot of words being in European comics and how they're kind of like they're also less accessible. I think you were saying like accessible in the sense of like approachable. I mean, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but
no, I think that's it. Is like, especially it's, I feel like now and going forward, like as manga starts to kind of drive the mainstream of comics, and for a lot of people, like that's the comics they're reading whether they know it or
right.
not. Like the
Like
more
manga probably makes like, you know, several times what the actual American comic book industry makes.
oh
Like
yeah,
I'm
they're
not
running
sure
circles. Even like Dark Horse manga is outselling Dark Horse
oh
comics like
wow, I
two
didn't
to
know that.
one.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense though.
like I'm pretty, I have no, grounds for these figures, but like I bet you Berserk helps keep the lights on.
Oh, for Dark Horse, you're saying?
Yeah, like
Yeah,
that book
interesting.
sells really well. But that
That's
being said,
interesting.
like I think the more and more it gets popular, like there's not a lot of that is very quick and very uh whatever the opposite of not wordy is.
Right.
Very, yeah, very brief, and I think like it's gonna
It's
drive people to
telling a
kind of,
story with images and not,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess what I was trying to say is you know, it's not accessible also just in the sense of like just getting these books is like it's not so easy. It's just like walking into, a comic book store or even like I almost said Borders, which doesn't exist obviously, but like a Barnes and Noble or whatever, like, you're not going to find I could be wrong. I mean, let's just preface this by saying like I could be wrong about literally everything I say, but you're not going to walk into Barnes and Noble and find like, like Blueberry by like Mobius or
No,
Jean
exactly.
Girard. And I actually I ordered uh like I ordered like one thing. I don't know exactly how you frame. It's not an issue so much. It's like I ordered one thing of like Blueberry. Um and I was like really surprised with like it's like you were saying before, it's like packed with words,
Yeah,
like packed, and it's like this is like Jean Girard, slash Mobius artwork here, and like every page is just like filled with words, like covering up like it's like amazing artwork, and it's like gigantic word balloon, just like that I'm not gonna read, like every single page is like very dense with words, and
I
I
think
had
it does
sorry.
deter people. Like,
For sure. I mean, it's too
yeah,
much. Like, it's too much. Especially for something like that, where it's like, come on, I'm buying this for Mobius here. I'm not buying this to like read words, but
exactly. Like, and I also feel too like he is such a good visual storyteller. Like, do you really need all that? Like, you can tell what's going on. Like, you don't need to be having all this dialogue
right.
and all this exhibition.
I was reading again, this is very difficult to get. I had to be like watching like a hawk on eBay to get stuff that's not like insanely expensive. But I was reading like Airtight Garage, which is more like Mobius's like, you know, I believe it's just totally created by him, right? Just
Yeah,
written and yeah, that's way more like, my speed where it's like just him basically. It's almost reminiscent of like I probably read an interview or something somewhere where he said this, but it's like reminiscent of like Little Nemo that he's like, he's doing like a page, 2 page gag, and then that's what's going to be in like heavy metal that month or whatever. You know what I mean? Like he's not. he's not making a full length comic book. He's doing like 2 pages at a time, like an installment of what, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're a lot more whimsical too than like some of his other work. Like, are you getting I imagine you're getting like those who was a
I th-
publisher?
I think they're like Marvel Epic,
Yes,
like
Epic, those Epic
floppies, like
reprints.
individual issues. Yeah.
Yeah, they put out a handful of like there's Airtight Garage stuff that he did, and then there's a bunch of like Airtight Garage stories.
Right. Like Prince Neverwhere or
Yeah,
something. Or
Elsewhere Prince is one of them,
yes.
and
Yes.
then Onyx something or other is another one.
Right. I haven't seen any of that. Like I barely have seen, I probably have like, I don't even know, 3 issues of Airtight Garage. So I barely have even seen that, you know?
It's a lot of it is I've lucked out. Like I'm sure at this point probably everyone's kind of gotten them by now, but like I happen to find a lot of them in dollar bins. But again, like
Oh,
Mobius
interesting.
didn't Mobius didn't draw those. Like
Right. And that's, yeah, that's the whole, that's why we're here. Like that's the
yeah,
whole fucking point. Like, yeah, I mean, uh, like I wonder if those are still good though, because, who draws those? I wonder. Elsewhere Prince?
I don't know. I actually have no idea. I hate to say it, it's some. I mean, he's probably very prolific in Europe, but like he wasn't
Right.
a
We
name
won't
in
know. Yeah.
America.
I hear you.
Um,
Eric Schenauer.
yeah. See,
I don't know. I don't know. Don't think I've ever heard of him. So
and
fuck that guy. No, I'm kidding. I'm
he
kidding. He's
tries his
probably very
best to
good.
draw like Mobius though.
Oh, interesting.
Like the covers, maybe it's just the covers that Mobius did, but like they do look very similar. But like that being said, I love that aesthetic more than I love the stories. So like when I can find people that are kind of using that aesthetic and telling it and or using it to tell stories that are a lot faster and kind of more brief, I'm all for it every time. I'm such a sucker for it.
Hmm. So what other books are kind of the books that sort of like got you into it? Like you mentioned like Brubaker, Criminal, like if it's me and I'm your friend and you're saying like, oh, I like Batman, like I'm probably gonna recommend like The Dark Knight Returns or like Batman Year One. I don't know if those are the
I mean,
kind of books.
I adore Year One.
Hmm.
I for a while I liked I still like a lot of the Batman where like it's more technical and more like detective based. So like anything in the first 3 years before like things started getting really crazy and like, real monsters started trying to come, like when it was just him kind of being a crime fighter and trying to figure it out and like being a little clumsy. I
Right, you
really
like the gritty street level,
yes,
like
exactly. And that's like, I
interesting.
love like Daredevil as well in that same vein. And a lot of those street level Marvel characters like that, I was always kind of really into, or like the Shadow.
Brubaker was God, unless I'm just gonna be totally wrong again, but Brubaker was on Daredevil for
He
several
was,
years.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I've actually never read any of those either. But like, Frank Miller's kind of this is the master of that, like kind of gritty street level kind of like
Yeah, definitely.
post-apocalyptic New York shithole like city that they're just trying to navigate their life through. So
So you haven't read Dark Knight Returns, just out of
no, I
curiosity?
have. Yeah, that
Okay,
one
all right, okay.
I've read a good amount of Frank
Because
Miller
I was gonna
stuff.
say that's very the post-apocalyptic New York that you're describing.
Oh, 100%. Like every time I get put like asked about what I like, it's all of a sudden you can't remember anything. I the other Batman, like Long Halloween and
Right.
whatever the sequel was, and then Haunted Nights, I think was the third one in that trilogy. Like I really love those, especially with like the mob stuff. Like again, because it's just a little more grounded than Killer Croc or things like that.
It's funny you say that because I was just recorded an episode of this recently where, like don't get me wrong, like I like the more grounded, realistic Batman. Like I like the Christopher Nolan movies, but it kind of is a little bit of a bummer to me that like the stuff you're talking about, the more silly, out there stuff. Like you kind of can't see it in like modern like Batman, at least like modern Batman movie depictions. Like you're not going to see like a killer croc, like you said, you know what I mean? It's like too crazy, like it's not realistic enough, you know? And that's
It's
kind
funny
of,
because
sorry.
no, in the movies, I actually wish I saw it. I agree with you. Like, I think like some of those like more wacky characters would be great for the movies. Like, they might be a little bit tired in the comics, but like make it a little kind of crazy. Like, it was, it's not too far to figure that one out. Like, they've done the Joker 13 times now. Like,
Right. Right.
give me something different. Give me like they use Ewan McGregor for Black Mask and Birds of Prey, but like put him in the
Oh,
Pattinson
interesting. I didn't
movies.
even know that. The Birds of Prey movie, I guess.
Yeah, he's the Black
Interesting.
Mask is the villain. He's a great villain. Like I love that like character design. Like I love that character, and I wish they would use him more in other things like that, or like give me like sad Mr. Freeze from the animated series,
Yes.
not
That's
wacky
what I was
Master
thinking is
Freeze.
like Mr. Freeze, would never fit into these like kind of Christopher Nolan, even the new Matt Reeves, the Batman. Like you just like Mr. Freeze, you just couldn't see him in one of these movies. Like he's too
No,
sci-fi, like it's too silly. Like it's like a guy in an astronaut suit shooting a freeze gun at everybody. It's like you couldn't see him alongside like the Robert Pattinson Batman, but like
exactly. Like
it's a shame though. It's like, it's like Batman is not real. Like, you know what I
none of
mean?
this is
Like,
real. Do what you
why does it
want.
have to be so realistic? Like Batman is not real. Like he's never going to be real. Like it's absurd. Like it's, Batman is inherently absurd, like so I wish they would kind of stop. I don't know. I wish they would be less like afraid to just be silly and weird. Like, there's a classic Batman character, Batmite, who is
Yeah.
like I'd love to see Batmite. He's like a fourth dimensional imp, I guess. I'm trying to think of like what is this character from the Flintstones that I'm gonna look it up.
Oh, the little dinosaur
The
thing.
Great Gazoo.
Yeah.
He's like the Great Gazoo, but in the Batman world. And now, people who are listening to this who are not like hardcore comic book readers, they'd be like, okay, that sounds terrible. Like, but I just don't know how to describe it to you that like there are silly cartoony elements of Batman that like, you're just never gonna escape, I guess. Like, or you shouldn't want to escape.
But like
Um,
even those silly characters, like I could be wrong, but like I feel like I remember like either Grant Morrison or like Scott Snyder
yes.
like using Batmite, and like it
Yeah,
wasn't.
Grant. That's what I was thinking. Is even as I was talking, is like Grant Morrison basically did this. Like he used Batmite in a way where I think he left it open to interpretation. Where you could say like, oh, maybe Bruce Wayne is just hallucinating this, or you know, Grant Morrison kind of tied it into his like sort of overarching philosophy of like the fifth dimension and stuff. Like I think at one point he implied that the fifth dimension is like the realm of ideas or something like that, he said. So it's sort of having his cake and eating it too, where he could say that it was a hallucination, but like the fifth dimension is the realm of hallucination, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
he sort of like he did it in a realistic way but also a not realistic way. He was using it as a venue for his sort of like career long philosophy about like extra dimensions and all that, which I'm sounding dismissive as I'm saying it, but I'm like hugely into and love Grant Morrison and stuff. So, but
We've gone so far now that like even the Riddler can't be a wacky character anymore.
right,
Like, it
right,
has to be a terrorist, like
right.
suicide. Like,
I mean, you know, this is going to be spoilers for anyone listening who hasn't seen the Batman, but I like that movie, The Batman. Like I liked it a lot,
same.
but like I did feel a little bit like, holy fucking shit, like the Riddler just fucking is like the Zodiac killer. Like the Riddler, like I think the Batman, I really think it was the darkest Batman movie it has to be of all
It
time.
has to
Like
be.
the
Absolutely.
first 5 minutes is like the Riddler zodiacking someone. Like holy shit, like what happened to riddle me this? And like, I don't know, like I don't want to seem like, oh, I'm like a prude or I'm like, I'm scared of like dark material, like because I'm not. Like I love it, but like I'm an adult. Like, like I think probably in my opinion, I think probably a Batman movie should be like appropriate for like a 10-year-old. I mean, call me crazy, like,
What's
you
really
know,
funny is like they kind of had that character as it was anyway. Like I feel like the Calendar Man is more like the Zodiac Killer than the like they could, but they don't want to have, some wacky character called the Calendar Man. They got to do
right,
something everybody knows. So like
right,
they turned like that's kind of the whole thing of Long Halloween was more like its own sort of Zodiac Killer type of thing. But like I agree with it, it is really dark. I love Pattinson, and I love, love moody emo Batman. But it does feel a little bit sometimes like a race to the bottom, like of like how dark can we get it? How shocking can we get it? Like, are we gonna hit Killing Joke level, shocking at some
right.
point? Which
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I've never been a big fan of that book. I understand like at the time what it was, the significance of it, but it never really did anything for me.
Yeah, I mean, just for people who listening who don't know, like The Killing Joke was like a classic Batman book in the 80s by written by Alan Moore with art by Brian Bolland. And I like it a lot. It's just, it was appropriate in like 1986 where like,
Yes.
it's like 1,000 years ago at this point. Like it's, I think that there is more potential for Batman than just like hyper realistic militarized version of the character. You
Well, it's
lose a
funny
lot.
because like
Sorry.
Nolan's Batman is kind of like a whole commentary on that. Is like, the ever growing levels of extremism that they all have to amount to because as things
Right.
get crazier and like, no lessons were learned in that. And
Right.
like,
It's kind
the
of it's kind of brilliant in the first movie, like ending it by saying like, like Commissioner Gordon says to Batman, like, look, like we start wearing armor, they get, armor piercing rounds. Like
exactly.
you dress up like Batman, now we have a Joker. Like, they didn't really touch on that too much in the following movies. That was kind of a thread that I don't think was really picked up on that much. But it's an interesting idea is that like once you start escalating, like you're kind of creating this problem a little. It's like, I don't know. It's tough because, you know, this is like, I feel the studios are kind of learning the wrong lesson. That's like Batman is the only one of these DC characters that's like consistently successful for them.
Yeah.
So you look at that as like a studio guy and you're like, so why don't we just like turn Superman into Batman? And that's like kind of what they tried to do with like Man of Steel and those movies. But I'm sure there's people listening right now who half the people love Man of Steel, half the people hate it. So it's tough when you're wading into kind of a somewhat of a controversial area like this. But I don't know. In my opinion, I wish they would go maybe a little bit more whimsical and surreal with this stuff. You
Or
should
even
be able
like
to. Sorry.
we have perfect Superman comics. Like All-Star Superman exists, and like
Right. Yeah.
Superman,
Yeah.
Man for All Seasons, is that the Tim Sale book?
Yes, I think
Like,
so. Yeah, Superman for all seasons. It's probably just
yeah,
called.
like those perfectly sum up that character. And like they Batman
I
is
would
at least
even
on
throw
to the
in
text.
Superman Birthright is a pretty
I've
good
never read
one.
that.
It's by Mark Wade and Lionel Yu, I think, is on the art. But it's another one in the sort of vein of the books that you're talking about. Like just classic. Like just adapt this panel for panel, and you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, like we have the text, like we have the sacred text, and like for whatever reason they've mostly gotten it right. I feel like across the span of all Batman material, they've gotten every iteration right.
Yeah,
They've
definitely.
never
I
they've
mean,
barely ever hit it with Superman.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Christopher Reeves
That's
movies.
probably the
Like,
only example of it.
yeah, those first two. I would even say like they made an All-Star Superman cartoon, that like a cartoon movie that
Oh,
I
I
thought.
keep the cartoons out of it. I actually think they pretty well nail it with the cartoons a lot of the time.
Right, yeah. The cartoon movie totally nails it. I think actually it's up there as like it's basically just a cartoon, like I said, panel for panel of All-Star Superman. It's I would put it up there as like one of the best Superman movies of all time, but I get what you're saying though, like kind of doesn't count because it's like not live action, but
They're also a lot more like it seems like they're a lot more in line with the books. Like I watched the Batman Year One movie,
oh,
and
interesting. Bryan
there's
Cranston as Commissioner Gordon, right? I think. Or
I
no.
just
Am I
no
totally
you're
wrong about that?
no
Or
you're correct, and it's
okay, good.
also
Okay, good. Whew,
incredibly inspired casting. Like
dodged another bullet there.
I think they've hit Gordon perfect. Like Jeffrey Wright, Gary Oldman, Bryan Cranston, three of the best choices they could ever make for Gordon.
Yeah. I really like Jeffrey Wright as Gordon.
I do too. I was
It's
so
pretty
excited.
cool.
He's such a great actor, and like what a perfect person to like following Oldman is a really hard thing. Like he was so
Right.
dude looks right out of a comic book, and like Jeffrey Wright
Yeah.
also looks right out of a comic book.
Interesting kind of a little bit of trivia here is Ben McKenzie does the voice of Bruce Wayne in Batman Year One. And then I'm pretty sure, isn't Ben McKenzie plays, yeah, Commissioner Gordon on the Gotham TV
Yeah,
show.
he does.
That's kind of an interesting
He
crossover.
also voices I believe he does do some voices for Gordon and some of the animated stuff as
Oh,
well.
interesting. Okay.
So they've kind of ping ponged him back and forth. They've had a lot of different Batman voice actors over the years.
I will say, I was giving the Batman a bit of a hard time, but with that's the one with Robert Pattinson. But I will say, like the dynamic between Batman and Commissioner Gordon and the way that they had just like the way they had Batman just like walking around a crime scene, and then other cops are like, "What the fuck?" Like you can't just have a vigilante walking around our crime scene. The way they're like were like giving him shit, and just the dynamic between Gordon and Batman, and having Batman walk around normal people, and then normal people being like, this is not normal, like this
Yeah, this
is
is wrong. We don't
right,
like this is not what police work's supposed to be. Like
yeah,
this is
this is
bad.
probably a crime. Like, like I thought that was like a very good presentation of Batman. Like you go back to I'm a big like Tim Burton Batman guy. Like those are like some of my favorite movies, literally of all time. Like the first two Batman
Mhm.
movies, and you go back and you watch like Batman Returns, and Batman just like walks around literally on the street. There's like people. There's like Commissioner Gordon, but there's also normal cops. There's like civilians, and he's just walking around. They're like, "Oh yeah, that's Batman. Yeah, he walks around." You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
there's
that's
like
just a guy that
zero.
hangs out with us. Like we know
Right.
him.
That's Batman. We were over this. We know he exists. Like it's kind of like stunning that like, there's zero reaction from the average person. But
So I
um
don't know if it's just because I grew up on them and like it, it's one of those like nostalgia lens type of things, but like the Schumacher ones for me, objectively not the best movies of any of them, but like those to me held up in my head as like the pivotal Batman for or like the perfect Batman for me. And like the thing I really like about him is like I feel like Schumacher was just attempting to do what he thought Tim Burton would do, but
hmm,
like he cranked it up to like 15. So like
right.
everything is like Tim Burton like put through acid. So like all the backgrounds are like most of
Yeah.
Tim Burton's backgrounds are like pretty normal, but then
He'll
like
have like
Schumacher,
a giant Prometheus statue, like
yeah, like
holding a
just
thing. Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
crazy shit. And
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
I actually like as an adult when I went to revisit those, I was watching I put on the Tim Burton ones and I was like, where's all this crazy stuff? Like I remember all these Tim Burton craziness, and then I watched the Schumacher ones. I was like,
Those are
oh,
the ones
like
that are really like over the
yeah,
top in
those are
terms
the
of like the
wacky ones.
visuals and
Like
stuff. Yeah.
everything's neon lit. Like it doesn't matter where you
Right.
are in the city, it's neon green or neon.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking
Um,
of I think this has got to be Batman Batman Forever, right? Where like Chris O'Donnell as Robin like fights the neon like I don't even know what they are, like neon street gang,
Yeah,
where they're like
exactly.
all in fluorescent light, black light. But
To
yeah, I
me, like
mean,
it always felt like I always just assumed that was Tim Burton because like that, like Beetlejuice has that same sort of aesthetic, but like it wasn't. It was Schumacher in my assumption trying to do Burton and live up to it. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's like a famous line from Schumacher where he's like, I forget who he said this to, like probably like Arnold Schwarzenegger or something, where he's like, remember, like we're doing a comic book here. Like we're doing a comic book. Like you like kept referring to it like as a comic book.
I
You know
love
what I'm
that.
saying? Like this is a comic book. We're doing like he had a weird vernacular like tick about it where he'd be like, remember, this is a comic book. Like,
But
well,
that says
no,
everything
it's
you need to know about his intention then, right? Like he wanted this to be as like ridiculous as his assumption about Batman was, which is great. Like, that goes against now what they want. They want this, these
right.
movies
It's
have
like
to be dead serious and
a lot of the movies now, like especially the Christopher Nolan ones, they've got to obviously be like big time reaction against like those Schumacher movies, which like kind of like arguably killed the franchise for them. Even though I believe they did phenomenally well at the
I think
box
they
office.
did.
So
Yeah.
I don't think like Batman and Robin with George Clooney, just because it's so hated, like I think people think like, oh, it must have been a flop, and it kind of like killed off the Batman franchise for like probably until I don't even know off the top of my head 2006 when Batman Begins came out.
I
So
think
that's
that's
like
right. Yeah.
something like close to a decade of no Batman movies, which is like a lot. But I think it actually did like very well. Like I'm pretty sure 1997, so it was close to a decade before they did another Batman movie. So it was pretty damaging to them. But yeah, I mean, 238 million box office. I mean, that's not
Crazy
nothing.
to think that's a flop now. Most people would, they'd be jumping for joy for that number.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was so crazy to look back and be like opening the same weekend as Men in Black.
Oh,
Just,
there you go. Okay,
you
that's
know.
why it flopped.
But
Putting it,
it didn't even flop. It did well. It's just like,
yeah,
it didn't, it had a bad second week. It's like, also again, in its second week, it's competing with Face Off and the Hercules like Disney movie. So it's just crazy to like, see these same kind of movies that are coming out at the same time. But I think like Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, like they're enjoyable just from the standpoint of just like if you look at this like it's like 90s Adam West's, like it's fine. Like they're fun, like it's fine. I don't know. I the
that's
one
how I have them in my head. Is like they, again, I was a kid when those came out.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So like in my head, like those were like as you said a while ago, like you think every 10-year-old should be able to watch a Batman movie. Like that was probably their mentality as well. Like
Yeah.
those are adult movies, but like they're so bombastic that like kids also could watch them and kind of the violence doesn't seem as extreme as Zodiac Killer Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be clear, like I think you could have like darkness in these kinds of in like I think you could have darkness in a Batman movie and still have it be appropriate for like kids. Like so for
Yeah, those
example,
movies are definitely dark.
like I was a big like Batman the animated series
Same.
kid, and I think like to this day like it still holds up as like one of the greatest of these like kind of like Saturday morning cartoon shows of all time. And you watch that and you're like, when Robin's parents got killed, for instance, so like Robin's parents who were like acrobats in the circus, the way they depict it in the cartoon is like they show the shadows of them on the wall like leaping, and then like you see like the shadows like falling. So like it's pretty clear, like the implication is that like they fell to their deaths, but they're not. You see, it's different than let's actually show people like falling to their deaths, and they like there's blood and they're like splattering on the ground. Like, okay, that's not appropriate for like a 10-year-old. But, you know, a 10-year-old can handle just like shadows on the wall. So there are tricks, you could use. And by the way, I'm realizing now after recording a different episode that like I have to try to control saying by the way over and over again. But you know, for these cartoons, they have very strict standards. Like, you could better believe if like they thought it was too dark, like they would literally not be allowed to do it. And I'm sure
Sure.
there's many examples where like they weren't able to get away with what they wanted to do. But I'm just saying the shadows on the wall thing that passed the strictest tests, for Saturday morning cartoons. Um,
But even like the Mr. Freeze episode, the famous one with like,
right.
Nora
A Heart
passing
of
away.
Ice, I think.
Yeah, yeah, like that episode's really sad by any measure.
Yeah,
Like,
no, it's a masterpiece, I would
yeah, that's a
say.
kid's show.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a kids show. That was really one of the early, I think that, yeah, it was in the first season. I think that was one of the early episodes where people were like, "Oh shit, this is like for real. Like
Yeah,
this is a really serious show." I'm trying to see like did it win awards? Like,
it had
yeah.
to have. I had I collect a lot of like commissions and original art, and I had Andrew McLean like do
Oh,
a Mr. Freeze from that with like Nora and his reflection like in the
wow.
yeah, it came out really amazing.
Andrew McLean, like that's like a really cool like piece, I imagine.
It's yeah, it's all like it's colored it's like colored marker, the whole thing. And it's actually not hanging up, which is really silly. I need to get a new frame for it. But it I was for a while I was collecting a bunch of like Batman Rogue Gallery like sketches. So that was one of them I got was from him.
Hmm. Just to give you an idea, like how strict these like networks were about like how dark it could be. Like, it says here like Batman says my god while watching the tape. I guess the tape of like Dr. Freeze's falling into a vat of, you know, uh like freezer fluid or whatever.
Mhm.
Um says my god while watching the tape, and which is unusual in a cartoon. And they basically like the censors considered any mention of religion inappropriate, it says. And
Wow.
and Bruce Timm here says it mentioned in the DVD commentary that he thought it was strange that they never caught it and removed that. Like that they let him get away with saying my God, you know.
Something so small that like you wouldn't even like if you said that like in
Be
person,
no
you
big
wouldn't think
deal.
about it. Yeah.
I mean, and then it says later here, it says when Toon Disney aired this episode, the network removed the phrase. They also removed Freeze's line, I'd kill for that. So even for Mr. Freeze, just to say I'd kill for that was too much.
But they still let, Robin's parents die as shadow people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, I honestly think like a certain amount of darkness is like kind of good for like kids in a weird way, but like maybe you don't want to show them like the Riddler bludgeon a guy to death with like a fucking like wrench or whatever it was in the movie, like whatever the
No, but it's a
murder.
way for kids to understand loss and learn, like they can learn what loss is through television. Like, and, maybe their parents have to explain what happened, but like it's still, it's still a way for them to kind of get it versus like, when grandma dies or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, you're kind of reminding me now of like, when I saw Man of Steel, uh, in theaters.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, this is like a 10-year-old spoiler at this point. So if you haven't seen Man of Steel, skip this part that I'm saying. But at the end of that movie, Superman pretty brutally like snaps General Zod's neck. Like it sounds like a joke as I'm saying it, but he like brutally kills General Zod and then screams like a fucking insane person. Like, you know what I mean? Like screams in agony that he was forced to murder, I guess. Um in the theater, like I heard a little kid like a couple rows down like ask his dad like, "Oh, like but General Zod like is just like sleeping, right? Like,
Oh
and the
no.
dad is like, no, I think he probably is not. You know what I mean? Like, my memory of it is vague, like what exactly the father said, but I remember the kid like asking, like, wait, so what just happened? Like, it's like, you know, I don't want to be too much of a hater in these like Man of Steel, like Zack Snyder verse movies, but like, come on, this is about a guy in a red cape who flies around and like, winks at the camera. Like, I don't know if like, I don't know if there should be a little kid in the movie theater being like, wait, like Superman is killing people, like,
Yes,
I
son.
don't
Yes,
know.
he is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the way these movies are now. It's like everything has to be as hardcore as possible. But yeah, I mean, I just sound like an old man, just like yelling at clouds now, I think. Like,
No, I'm with you. Like as an adult, I don't mind it, but like these are ultimately they started off as things for kids, and now look where we're at.
right. It sort of like speaks to something in our culture that like, you know, adults feel like Batman has to be for me, like,
Like, no, it doesn't. There's plenty
right.
of stuff. There's plenty of comics for adults. I would say most comics are for adults. Like, you don't need to have the superheroes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do it in a way where it's like obviously the sweet zone is it appeals to kids and it appeals to adults. It's like sort of I'd almost say like the sort of the Star Wars formula where like, I'm sure when Star Wars came out in like 1977, like kids lost their minds and absolutely
Absolutely.
loved it. And so did adults. But like it was appropriate for both. And by the way, okay, I said it again. All right. But I'm gonna edit that out. But in that original Star Wars, um, Darth Vader blows up an entire planet. Like that's pretty dark. Uh, Obi-Wan, his Luke Skywalker's parents are like brutally burned to death by the stormtroopers. You know, Obi-Wan is just like killed, basically, like vanished. I'm just saying, like, there's plenty of darkness in, a movie that is totally fine, like for kids, in my opinion. Like, I don't know if you'd show a 1 year old that, but you know, it's a big uh gulf between that and like the Riddler fucking like kills a guy with like a wrench. He's like blood in the wrench. Like, I don't know. You could show dark stuff without it being like something you'd see like a crime documentary or something.
Exactly. And that's it's just a race to the bottom of like shock value, which frustrates me.
I do like that movie though, so I don't want to be a hater. I'm just
No,
saying
I'm a big fan of it. I adore that movie, so I'm with you.
I'm just conflicted about it. We're like, I don't know, I love it, but like I'm an adult man, like, like uh I don't know if like maybe things that should be toys for little kids are like so insanely dark, but
Yeah, then they'll go and take this dark movie and then make a Funko Pop off of it, and you're like, wait, this
right. There probably literally are. There's definitely literally Funko Pops of Robert Pattinson Batman, right?
oh
There's gotta be.
10,000%. There's probably a Riddler.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
There's
it's so
gotta be.
weird. It's interesting too that I think like Paul Dano was doing did this already come out and I'm just that out of touch, but I think he was doing like a Batman like Riddler comic book,
He is
like writing
actually.
it.
It just came out. I was at the shop.
Oh, interesting.
It was at the shop the other day, and it was on the shelves. I was like, I looked. I was like, did he actually write
Riddler
this?
year one.
Yeah, exactly. Also, yes, I'm looking now. They made a Riddler, like Paul Dano Riddler Funko Pop. I'm
Yeah, of course. Of
like
course.
this is insane.
They have to. Funko Pops are such a just a weird, bizarre phenomenon. Like, I don't know. I guess there must be people who love them. I mean, obviously, but
There's many,
um,
unfortunately.
have you ever read like Arkham Asylum um by Grant Morrison? And
Dave
again,
McKean.
yes, yes, yes. You saved my
Yeah, that
life
was
there.
That was one of the that was like one of the two, like that and
So you did, that was one of the early ones that you were introduced to.
yeah, and I really didn't like it.
Oh, interesting.
It was that one and oh my God, we were just talking about it. The Alan Moore one.
The Killing Joke.
Yeah, Killing Joke I really like. I just didn't care for. I respect what they were, especially Arkham Asylum. Like it's so unique looking for a Batman comic, but like it just didn't do anything for me.
That's interesting because when you said you didn't like the Killing Joke, I would imagine like, at least I guess artistically, like Arkham Asylum just being kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of that. That it's like almost this like, it's almost like surreal, the depiction of the different characters and stuff. Sort of Dave McKean's style of like painting things. Like I would,
Yeah.
I would imagine that's more of like a stranger's style Batman than like Killing Joke, which feels more like Killing Joke feels more like a mainstream like Cape Comics style book to me.
It definitely is. I would say like it's funny because the aesthetic I would say is very close to Strangers, but it's also been like 7 or so years since I've read it, so it's probably worth me revisiting. So when I say I didn't like it,
Yeah, yeah.
23
At that
23 year
time,
old me
yeah,
didn't like it.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but I just remember like I got what they were going for. Like the book was literally so hard to read for how dark they made it, and I know that was
You
part of the
mean like
intention.
dark in terms of like hard to read, like visually you're saying, or you mean
Visually, yeah,
like the
visually,
yeah, yeah, I
not
gotcha.
like the subject matter. Like it was
Right,
literally hard
right,
to read the text on the page.
right, yeah.
And it just I don't know. I really can't explain what I didn't like about it. Because it's also been forever since I did read it. But at the time, it was I just was like, nope, this is the
Hmm.
overrated one amongst the bunch.
Grant Morrison can kind of be a little bit of like a acquired taste too, that like um
I hate Final Crisis, so yes,
oh,
I'm
interesting.
yeah, I really
I like, I'm like, world's biggest. Um, Again, I'm not the world's biggest. There's always someone who's going to know more than you, but I'm a huge like Grant Morrison fan. He's probably my favorite comic book writer. But like, I get where you're coming from. Like, Final Crisis is like, you kind of have to be deep in Grant Morrison world to get it. Like, if you're not like a big Grant Morrison guy, I could see like not really getting it, because it's everything he does is sort of involving his whole overarching uh ethos. Or I also want to throw in here, I have probably been saying like he and his, like I didn't mean to do that. Like I meant to say they and theirs, just to be clear. Like, it's because he's like, he uses like they them pronouns. So I'm just saying, I'm realizing now I definitely said the wrong pronouns throughout this, but don't pay attention to that. I'm not a bad person. Back me up here, Eddie.
no, it, I actually forgot until you said something, so I'm glad.
I probably
Um,
would have got away with it.
yeah, it's all right. You're okay. You admitted your faults and you correct
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
towards
It's
the end.
hard, and I've been a fan of Grant Morrison since I was like, a young kid. So it's hard to just reset your brain for something you've been saying your whole life, and it's just tough. But
The
um,
work the work they did with Quietly is probably the stuff I like the most from them.
oh yeah, for sure. Have you
Like
ever read Flex Mentalo?
no,
You gotta
the
check
one
that out.
especially the indie stuff I like in particular by them is like is We Three.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then I really like Batman and Robin. It's like the
Yeah, definitely.
that's post Final Crisis, right?
I think so. Yes. I think it has to be because Batman died in
Yeah,
Batman Final Crisis. So,
it's Dick and Damien, so
right. And that,
um
that may have been like the greatest, like, Graham Morrison has probably said this actually, but that was like kind of a shame that like they had this perfect idea of Dick Grayson as Batman and then Bruce Wayne's son as Robin, and sort of reversing the dynamic of having, instead of Batman being like the quiet, like, straight man, Like now Batman is actually the more colorful, like exciting one, and Robin is more of like the hard ass. Like it's kind of like a brilliant inversion of that relationship.
It
But
was. And I've always been a Dick Grayson. I like Dick Grayson a lot. I liked him as Batman. It's just also like I know everyone kind of hates Damian, so it's kind of that's also like half the point. Like he's just a kid and he's just bratty and this and that. But they just that dynamic worked. What was the villain's name? Mr. Pig or like
yeah,
Pigface? Yeah, it was great. What a Quietly is so good. It
yeah, and
just
Quietly obviously is like, one of the all-time great comic book artists. You got to check out Flex Mentallo, but the only thing I would say is it's just tough because the like the reprinting they did that makes it more accessible.
mhm.
Like they did new colors on it, and
Ugh.
I think it was supposed to be. I think Quietly says like this is actually how I wanted it originally. So it's in line with his vision. Just like here's the thing though, is he's wrong. So he's wrong in my opinion. So it's sort of like George Lucas, like tinkering with Star Wars and adding all this like CGI stuff into it and stuff. Like it's sort of like, I know you created it, but you happen to be wrong in this instance. But so in
Yeah.
my opinion, the original colors are way better, but the only way to get them is like you got to eBay those original issues. You got to, illegally download, which I don't recommend, but
Yeah.
allegedly illegally download. But
This is a random question. Have you ever been to Scotland before?
no.
So, there's a hotel in Glasgow called the Radisson Red, and the Radisson's like part of some conglomerate, whatever. Um, but they had quietly do like dozens of murals throughout the hotel. So like the entire thing is just like it's just a Frank Quietly artwork piece that you're in the middle of. And like the rooms have huge Quietly pieces in them. The bar
Oh
has a ton of
wow.
them. It's
I'm looking
amazing.
at pictures of it now. Yeah, it's incredible.
It's so cool. I gotta go
The
there.
rooms have it in there.
Yeah, there's like
That's so
superheroes in the room
wild.
that they're like painted by him.
That's so
He's
cool.
I believe he's from Glasgow, so that's why they had him do
Yeah.
it. And it's just amazing to see. Like it was really awesome. But
Yeah,
worth
I'm looking
it's
at
just like
pictures. It's
going in
like
there just to see
incredible.
it. Like get a drink at the bar and just like look in amazement. And it's funny too, because like I was there with a few friends that are quietly fans, and we're all just looking around like enamored. And then just people that could give two shits are just
Right. They have
yeah
no idea. Like
yeah.
it's
You have
like
no
that
idea you're in the presence of a master.
right. Right. It's like that one meme where the guy is like standing at the edge of the party, like,
They don't know you're
right. They don't know like we're currently living inside a Frank Quietly drawing right now. Like, is it literally like I'm looking at pictures of it? So is this drawn by hand? Like it's not like a print, right? On the wall.
no,
It's like
they're murals on the walls.
yeah, and then it's just hard for me even to wrap my head around. Like, so he did this at size like this. This is
Yeah, they're
not
huge.
just crazy to think, like, what a talent. But like it's hard for me to even wrap my head around the idea of doing, okay, I draw on, obviously he's not doing comic book drawings on like comic book sized paper. Like it's obviously much larger than comic book paper, but you're drawing on this like paper and then now it'd be on a huge wall. It's hard to even conceive of like how he did it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, exactly.
like
I want to go back with a saw and cut down the wall and take a piece home.
it is crazy to think like, so what are they going to do? Like
It,
going forward into the future, like you can't paint over that. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, it's this literally like 100 years from now, this is gonna be like some billionaire collector is gonna like have one of these walls removed and like, or the
I hope
outside, the
so.
exterior part of it.
Like at the very least, I hope that like at least some rich asshole gets it over them just like painting it, because at least then it's saved, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, you can't do
for
that.
like posterity, wherever the word is, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it'll continue to exist. Like, don't bury the artwork, like because a hotel could give two shits about it, and they're just like, all right, we're time to
Right. Now we do the next I'm
You got
trying to
20
think of
years, time for a
who's the
rebrand.
hackiest artist you could have the paint over it, but
Yeah,
now we
like
do the Dilbert collection.
no, they're gonna replace them with like photos of like old buildings from the city covered
Right.
in graffiti.
Right. It's gonna be like a sailboat on like troubled water. I'm looking at some of these pictures here and it's like this is no joke. Like it's like one of these looks like it's like a page out of Flex Mentallo here. One of
They very
these.
well likely. Some of the characters look a little bit too like thought out, you know, like they're not just like some generic superhero. Like there's one in a room that I remember looking at, and I was like, this looks like something that I just am not familiar with.
Hmm. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he like sort of tried to do kind of shout outs to stuff from throughout his career. I mean, I'm seeing stuff that looks familiar to me, but yeah, it's like you're saying, like, I can't necessarily say that it's from this or that, but it looks kind of familiar to me. Speaking of Frank Wiley, I don't know, are you a big have you read The Invisibles?
No, I don't think I've read any of it actually.
That one I mean, the vast majority of that is not. I think there's maybe just one issue that's by Quietly. So obviously it's not like, if you're trying to get like your Quietly fix, that's not going to be the one. But I just bring it up because I happened to eBay like the last issue of that has like Quietly artwork. So I was just like looking through that. It's probably 1999, I bet, when it came out. Just crazy to look through and be like, this was just in like a floppy that, like it's crazy. Like,
I know he's it feels silly to sometimes be like you're just your work is so amazing and it just gets lost in the ether of certain thing, like lost in a dollar bin somewhere.
right, yeah. It's crazy. Like I said this on a previous episode I recorded recently, but it's like a lot of this stuff to me, in my opinion, like should literally be in the Louvre. But I feel silly when I say that, like, like it's a joke, but or like I don't know, but it's not a joke to me. Like I really think like Frank Quietly like should be in like major museums, but he just goes like relatively unknown by, your average person walking around just has no idea who that is. But similar to like Jack Kirby or whatever, like if you ask the average guy walking around, they're not going to know who that is, but they know who Stan Lee is. So,
Yeah, it's only only been the last, I don't know, I'm gonna probably be a bit off in this one, but only in the last like 15 to 20 years has Kirby really gotten his flowers in the way that like some of these people have before. And someone's gonna come back and be like, no, he's always had his flowers. It's like, yeah, but like as the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ramped up, people have finally started to pay a little bit more attention to Kirby.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, I would still say like, you
he's
know,
still, yeah,
if we
the
go
late,
out there and we go ask 100 people like who Jack Kirby is, I feel pretty confident saying like I would say probably 99 people out of 100 would not know. Like, and even then, I feel like it might just easily be 100 out of 100.
yeah, I can give it
But
to you.
they're all gonna know who Stan Lee is.
Oh,
So it's
absolutely.
crazy. Just it's like I don't know. It's a little bit of an injustice that, or it's a huge bit of injustice that he's not. He should be, again, I'm gonna come across sounding like a fanatic, but like he should be like taught in schools, like, like I don't know. You should be taught in a school who Jack Kirby is, but that'll never happen in a million years. But um, anyway, getting back more to sort of the strangers publishing stuff. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is just like crowdfunding in general. Like, I look at the strangers publishing site and I guess you started like February like 2020, which is just
Yeah,
like you started basically like 2 weeks before the pandemic,
you
basically.
bet I
So
did.
just so like I'm just curious about that as like, you know, did that have a big effect on you? Like, did that help you in some way? That's like, okay, now the idea of like crowdfunding and like buying comics that are delivered directly to your house is like a lot more appealing during like the height of the pandemic, or like maybe it hurt you that like people weren't spending money, or
So, Grant, Strangers started as a fanzine first, and I actually do think the pandemic helped quite a bit.
Interesting.
Which is, a little grim to say, but like everyone was at home,
Right. Right.
and I'm sure you experienced it too. Like you were buying a shitload of comics during the pandemic because it was all you had to do. Like I had stuff coming to me every week, whether I was buying it or people were sending it to me and trading and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was easy to connect with it was easier to connect with an audience when everyone was just like aggressively online. So like getting noticed was pretty easy. Um, I didn't start doing comics until about start publishing comics until about the end of the first year. That was when like Dynamite Diva 3 and Sober #1 came out. Those were the first books we published. And even still, like that was obviously still the height of the pandemic, end of 2000. End of 2020. So the first like 6 to 8 months, or I guess first year and a half of the fanzine and publishing, like was really like just kind of super buzzy. But again, it was buzzy in a circle that I don't think I'm really involved in anymore, as Strangers has changed, and the books we publish have changed. So
What do you mean
um
by that? Like what circle are you not involved with anymore?
I wouldn't say not involved with, but like I think my audience has
I want to
changed.
hear names. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm
Kidding.
not involved. No, it's just like I think the books we were putting out were like kind of more related to the underground and more related to like American indie books. Where like now, like I think the readers are different. Like you and I might
Hmm.
be kind of shared between the two, but like the folks that are reading something like Tyler Landry's new book that I just put out are not the same people
Hmm.
that were reading, the first set of books that I put out.
I'm
So
just like, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just looking at
no,
this here. I'm looking at like Strangers Fanzine #2, which I'm just looking at, it's like, is this a Jeff Darrow? Uh no, it's not a Jeff Darrow illustration on the cover, right?
no, it's
But it's doing his hard-boiled character, I guess.
yeah, Alex Delaney drew that.
Okay, I gotcha. But you have like an interview in here with Jeff Darrow talking about like Kirby and Mobius and this kind of stuff we're talking about right now.
Yeah,
Funny
so
enough.
it's funny because like the people I was interviewing seemed to be a little bit more in line with what I wanted to publish. So there was kind of that dissonance for a bit, which I think is sort of, again, as I explained, like I feel like the vision I always had of Strangers is now finally kind of hit its stride, and it's exactly what I've always wanted it to be. So when I say I I was buzzy in circles that I'm like I don't think are relevant to Strangers anymore. There's still a lot of readership that's crosses over. I still have people that have been reading Strangers, from the fanzine to the
Hmm.
latest books we published. But I think like the folks that are interested in like lowbrow comics and Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly and Undergrounds are not the same people that are looking at kind of some of this newer stuff that I did, which is
Right. So you
I
might
think
say like maybe like slightly more mainstream reader, you might say, like
I would
mainstream.
say that, yeah. Like, like Noah Bailey literally works. He has a book through us, and he does a lot with
Right.
Dark Horse. Like,
Right.
Tyler's done or Tyler's done books through like Uncivilized, and like he's always done a lot of sci-fi stuff. So mainstream maybe like not exactly accurate, but I think like if the spectrum was Fantagraphics to Dark Horse, I'm thinking I'm probably a lot more on the side of Dark Horse than I am on Fantagraphics now, if that makes
Right. No,
any sense.
it's difficult because like it makes 100% sense to me, but like I'm not totally sure if someone listening to this who has no idea, it's hard to articulate what you're talking about.
It
But
is like I think about it so much, like because I'm constantly looking at the art, I'm constantly looking at the books, and like I obviously know where everything came from and where it's going, and like the best I've been able to say is like this is the stuff I'm putting out now is kind of been the vision all along of like what I wanted it to be. Like, knowing the stuff that I loved, like knowing I was a big Jeff Darrow fan and that I really love Mobius and, loving Tetsuo Nihei's work and finding creators and connecting with creators that, those were also their influences versus like folks that were like influenced by like Klaus or like people like that. Like that's, those books are great, but like it wasn't it wasn't the stuff I wanted to put out there. There's other people putting that stuff out and they're doing a great job of it, but I wanted to put something out that I was interested in or more interested in that I wasn't seeing out there.
Hmm.
So,
It's kind of interesting. You think of Jeff Darrow, and I do think he has almost kind of, you can't say that he's like, underground comics or whatever, but I do think he has kind of a bit of that vibe. You know, I'm just curious, like what kind of books of his like were you a big fan of?
of Darrow's
Yeah, yeah.
hard boiled,
Hard boiled, right?
yeah, like that's my big one. I like looking at Shaolin Cowboy a bit more than I like reading
Right,
it.
right.
Just 'cause, like,
That's one where it's like heavy, heavy visual book. It's not really, I would think you would like that because it's like there could easily be like a 5-page fight sequence. So it's all visual. Like it's not inundating you with like big time word balloons.
oh, I definitely like it. I definitely really enjoy it, but I think like hard boiled, it's Frank Miller. He's a
Right.
perfect
There's more. I
storyboarder.
will say, like, when it comes to Shaolin Cowboy, like, I'm a big fan of that since like I was like a teenager. I was ordering the issues of that back when it was published by Burly Man Press,
Oh wow.
which was like the Wachowski's publishing thing.
I don't know if I ever
Um
knew about that. That's really cool.
yeah, yeah. Shaolin Cowboy actually was originally uh published by the Wachowskis, and they actually wrote like an intro to it, I believe. Like each issue would have in Shaolin Cowboy there's like a talking donkey
Mhm.
character, which, looking back on it, it's like Shrek, maybe owes a little bit to that, but um I'm pretty sure each issue, like the first page, would have like a long monologue that was just like the Wachowskis writing like this like crazy monologue. It'd be like the whole page would be taken up by like a massive word balloon of them just like talking to the audience pretty much.
That's
But
so cool.
it's interesting because like Jeff Darrow like kind of famously worked on like the Matrix. Like a lot of the Matrix, you know, Jeff Darrow is like kind of like one of the secret, he's not uncredited, but he's like sort of in the public imagination. Everybody thinks like, oh, the Wachowskis, they made the Matrix. Yes, they made the Matrix, but it's kind of like, a lot of the super iconic visuals in there are just like literally Jeff Darrow drawings.
Yeah, he did a lot of the visual, like a lot of the aesthetic of like all the you can once you know that you see it all over. It's like soup like
oh yeah, yeah.
all the backgrounds are so meticulous and like over the top and it's like,
That's sort of like Jeff Darrow, like messy technology, I guess, is
yes, exactly.
a term I just coined and am trademarking right now.
I
So
like that messy
no
tech.
one, no one listening to this can steal it from me. But you know, I don't know. I guess what I was just saying is like, at the time it made sense that like Jeff Darrow was like making this book with them. He was like probably obviously friends with them, that like went through their publishing company. And I don't know, it's kind of in a funny way, it kind of reminds me of like what you're doing today. Like it was like they were way ahead of their time. This was like, 20 years ago now. They were way ahead of their time. That's just like they had a website that was just Burly Man Press, and it probably still exists to this day. And you just order the comic through the website, and it's like literally the same thing as like a strangerspublishing.com, It's like um it's just crazy to think like, maybe in 2004 that was not like a viable model, but now today, like in 2023, like you could sell comics. Your publisher could just be selling books like on your website, and that's a totally, normal thing to the average person. Like they understand that. They understand like online retail basically. Or maybe in, 2004, it was not as uh omnipresent as it is now.
You know, Dylan Williams is?
No, I don't think so.
He ran Sparkplug Comics. He passed away, I think, in like the mid 2010s. But Austin English from Domino has written I guess they were very close friends,
Hmm.
and has written extensively about Dylan's work. But the thing that was really interesting with Sparkplug is like they never really did any of the distribution. They didn't go through Diamond at the time. They like only kind of went through festivals and selling online and kind of more direct sales. And I think they were kind of the ones to really like start this, right? Like they were the ones that were kind of one of the early publishers, at least of modern publishers, that kind of been like, we're gonna do this our own way.
Hmm.
And by no means am I saying I'm like this. I have a deal with Lunar, like, I'm going through all the traditional channels, but like
Now it comes out. Now we hear the real
I'm
story.
a
No, I'm kidding.
fraud. No, it's funny. I have the Lunar distribution, and like I've only started recently using it, and starting to try and push it and talk about it.
That's smart though. I mean,
It's
like why shouldn't you try to get into comic book stores? Like, of
it's
course.
kind of crazy. Like I put like a handful of titles. I was like, I'm gonna try this with like 3 or 4 titles, and like I was shocked at the results. Like I even like I
So
sent
the stores are ordering like numbers and
yeah,
significant.
and without really any promotion on my part, I kind of just like did it and was like, all right, I'm gonna see what kind of comes of this. And like it,
Did you like reach out to individual stores to say like, you know what I mean? Did you do any kind of like,
no, I actually didn't have. I would let stores that I have like a partnership, like, or that I work with directly. I'd be like, hey, like I'm on Lunar now, by the way. Like if you ever need anything, and like I'm not getting back to you or whatever. Um, but like I had after like the final order cutoff came in, I like got the numbers and I got the stores, and like it's strange. Like shops will just take a shot. Like if you're on Lunar, they'll just
hmm,
take a chance on you. They'll just, because a lot of stores are like, oh, I'll just get one of everything, whatever. Like somebody will buy it, or if not, like it'll just go in the dollar bin. And like then there's big stores like Midtown ordered like 15 copies of all our books, and I was like,
huh,
Midtown Comics, like like
right.
like that's crazy. But to
Yeah.
them, like they're so big that like if they sell
That's
half
like
that
a
big,
drop in the bucket to them.
yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
worth it
Like
to
why
take a bet
not?
on it. If it doesn't pay off, well, they spent, almost nothing for
That,
them.
or if it
Like,
doesn't pay off, they'll put it in the dollar bin until like the By the Lingering Light movie comes out, and they're like, oh, we got 7 copies of this, we're gonna sell them for $800. Like
right.
it doesn't matter to them. Like it
Right.
was
It's
that
a
was really
cheap investment for only benefit. Like it's
yeah, I guess so. Or like, so that was really interesting to me. It was like it kind of opened my eyes. Like stores will just take a shot on you. Like even if they're not, and like stores that like won't answer your emails for direct ordering, because like you don't think about like
right. If you're in the lunar, like, I'm giving away that I don't even know what I'm talking about, I guess. But like, how does Lunar do it? Because like I know like Diamond will have like previews. Like,
they
how does it
have their
work?
own previews. It's
They
called
have their
Next
own previews, of
Phase.
course.
Yeah,
So it's like, it's like a print thing, or
it's a digital
I
magazine.
got you.
But it's the same thing. And the nice thing too is like they gotta use Next Phase to order, the whatever like
So what's
bulk
the process
comics.
like
Or
for getting into that? Like, do
I
you,
actually like truthfully, it was Dave Baker and Jason from Floating World. They were really the two to help like get
oh,
me
interesting.
into it. They were big champions on my behalf, and like
Oh, that's cool.
when Floating World got into Lunar, I'd reached out just kind of like, hey, like how do you do this? Like it's, something I've been curious about, and it feels like the next step for strangers. And both Dave and Jason were, again, huge advocates on my part. emailed Christina, who's the owner of Lunar, and just kind of made a pitch for what we were doing, and she was open to it. I had a meeting with them, and she's like, "Great, here's a contract. Like, here's how you do it," and it was pretty easy, honestly.
Huh.
But yeah, I can't shout both of them out enough for kind of sticking their neck out and helping me get that. Because again, it did really change. Like the numbers I got now, like on our books, were like triple our print runs from some books. So like folks are now, it's kind of it was an instant jump in strangers, which was really pretty awesome.
Interesting. So what would you say, like, sort of, let's say like I'm an artist, or I'm a writer, or I'm an artist writer. Um, like, let's say like I'm deeply interested in strangers. Excuse me. And um, like, let's say I wanted to get my book into strangers, like, what would you say to that person? Or maybe this is a young kid, maybe I'm not quite there yet in terms of, like, being quote unquote like good enough to get into strangers. Or like, what would you say to this person who's like aspiring to sort of like be in the lineup?
Oh, dude, I'm really bad at rejections. Like, I hate doing. I like. It, I have no good answer, honestly. Like, I'm super bad with them, and like, I think there's always redeeming qualities of every book, and like, that was always something. Even when I was doing reviews, like even if I didn't like the book, I would try to find something worth talking about. It, I have no good answer as to what I would tell people that like I would maybe reject, but like are close to it. It was the reason why for a while I didn't open up submissions because I just felt so weird about like telling people no. It
So
was
yeah, I mean, that's something to get into, is like you have like pretty much just open submissions. Like, would you say
no, I
that's correct?
I opened them up for the first time this year. And that post is so old, so I guess like technically like I never closed them officially, but like
Okay, I got you.
that post is now 6 or 7 months old. But the thing that was kind of funny about that post is like I
So
took a few.
you did have open submissions like for a
I
period,
did,
but not
yeah.
for eternity.
No, and that open submissions was interesting because I think there was very few books that I took that were just like cold submissions, but what was interesting was the amount of people that like were on my radar or like followed me, and if I followed them, and just like mutuals,
It
online
was
mutuals
people
that I
you were like curious about and like interested in, but maybe were not confident enough to yet like pull the trigger on it.
or like
It's
not
like
even
that.
not even that. Like I just didn't think they had any interest in doing something with
Right. You didn't
strangers. Like,
know that they cared or were paying
yeah, and
attention,
then
or
like Aaron, I'll use a perfect example. Like Aaron Losty is a creator from Ireland. He just moved to Canada. And I love Aaron's work. We met at Thought Bubble and we hit it off, and been following each other and this and that. And I never thought to hit Aaron up. I was just kind of like, he's doing his own thing in Ireland. Like he's, never put the thought that he might be interested in doing something with us. And he said something, reacted like emoji reacted to the open
fire
submission.
symbol.
Yeah, or like
Wasn't
eyeball.
that what it was? That's my
And I
guess.
wrote to him. I was like, "Hey man, like if you're interested, like I would gladly talk to you about doing something together." And it was very quick. He's like, "Dude, I would love to. Like, thank you." I pretty much told him, I was like, "Hey, if you submit something, you're in. Like, I love your work." And he did, and he was like, "Great, I'll send you something in a couple weeks." Like, and sent me a really cool book, and it was kind of that easy. And that was the case for a few people where it was like, it's that like you don't realize that the girl at the dance thinks you're cute too.
Right.
And
Right.
so like all of a sudden these creators that like admired you from afar and you admired them from afar, we never really talked about it. All of a sudden it was like a good icebreaker. And yeah, just I'm really excited for 2024 and the books we have coming out because of that reason. And just like it opened up a lot of conversations that previously I didn't think were gonna happen. So
Right. Yeah. Kind of put the flag up to say, like, I want to hear from you, to people who maybe thought like, oh, well, he's got his own thing going on. He doesn't want me to, like,
Exactly. And I think like even you and I like talked about something too, like when that happened, or like you were doing that book with Graham, and I was like, keep me like,
oh, that's right. Yeah.
yeah, like share, keep me in the loop on this. Like it's a nice conversation starter, like knowing that like, oh, this might be a vehicle for this book I'm doing. So
All right. So if you're listening to this and you're a young artist, just
in a
become Aaron
mutual.
Losty. Just transform into Aaron Losty, and you're in, right? I mean, it's easy as that. No, I'm kidding,
It is
obviously,
a good
but
rule. Like I feel like it is a good rule of like, if we are mutuals, there's a good chance I probably really love your art and like would be willing to like at some degree
right,
work with
yeah. If
you.
you're if you're an artist and you see Eddie like clicking like on your Instagram constantly, like it's probably you should, get over like a fear of rejection that you might have and take a leap because it
I
sounds
also
like
like I try to be really like really open with it too. Like I don't know how other publishers do their stuff, but like I have no qualms about like writing on some artist's post and being like, "Yo, I really love this. Like this is amazing." And just like one, I have no idea if people think of strangers as like, that makes their week hearing that like I'm interested in their
right,
work. I don't want to. I by no means do I have the ego to think like, that's gonna be exciting for someone, but like at the
right.
very least, it lets them know that like, hey, I might be interested, or like, oh, strangers likes my work. Like maybe I can reach out to them sometime. So like, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's also an element that it's like, listen, it costs you nothing, and I don't know, like it's not going to hurt the person's feelings to hear that
yeah,
you like their
your
work.
work
Like
is
it's
great. Damn, why'd they say that?
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing that could happen is that the person will not see it, or they'll just be like, "Oh, this guy likes my work." Okay, like it's
Exactly. Which
like
nine times out of
nothing
ten, that
negative
is
can
what
come.
happens. But
Yeah, I
like
mean, sorry.
it's if anything, it is at least an open door, like, or in their eyes, or whatever, like it opens the door to be like, oh, this guy likes my work, like maybe this
Yeah, it
is
starts
somewhere
a
like
conversation where now
exactly.
like you could, it feels a little bit in this online world that we're in now, it is very weird to just be like, I'm gonna cold email somebody that I've never spoken to before and try to like, work with them basically. Like it's, not everybody is comfortable with that. Like um, not everybody, like I would probably argue most people do not like just like emailing people like in this kind of format of like trying to, like emailing an editor. Like I
Exactly. And like that's why I try to like, again, I hate if it comes off any sort of like ego of like, oh, like I try to do this because I'm the publisher and whatever, like, but I do try to reach out to folks just to be like, hey, like I love your work, like if you ever want to do anything, like, I have there's a couple different vessels of like, anthologies or whatever that I'm putting together, and like I've become less precious about being worried about cold emailing. Like I've reached out to some creators where I was like, there's no shot. Like there's no
right,
shot they're interested in working with me.
right,
And again, that's my own thing. Like I was like, they're too big for me or whatever. And
right.
it's turned out that they were very interested. And like,
Yeah,
I've got an anthology coming out in 2024 that I'm working on with my buddy Tom Nisha. And I reached out to some creators that was like, no
there's no way.
chance. No
Yeah, I
chance.
mean,
Like
it's funny to hear you talk about this because like this is literally like my life. Like it's just like you email people and it's like you hope that, there's plenty of people I've emailed where it's just like, you know, who am I? Like this guy is not going to reply to
exactly.
me, and you know, why should he reply to me? Like,
Yeah, like these guys got 100,000 followers on Instagram, and they've done
right,
published books with like bigger companies. Like,
right,
why should they give a shit about me? And
yeah, but
I'm I'm
it's
I'm
like,
pleasantly surprised.
I'm saying like, maybe we're kind of similar in this way that you know, for me, like this is what I'm good at. Like I'm good at like reaching out to people, and I feel, I wouldn't like, I'm not trying to lob like a baseball at the sun. Like I'm trying to, email someone who's, I have some dream that they would reply to me. Like I'm not like emailing Jim Lee and
I was
being
literally about to
like,
make that joke. That was the
yeah,
example I was going
yeah,
to use. But like,
yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to like empty out the ocean with like a cup or whatever. Like, I'm trying to email people who I have some inkling of a reason to think that they'll give a shit that I exist. But
like I'm
I'm just
sure Grimm
saying,
is a good
like,
example. Like Grimm's been
no,
published
for
by
sure,
Image
that's
and
a
like
perfect example. Is like,
they're amazing. And
yeah,
like,
I
it
mean,
probably
Grimm
felt great
happened
when
to
you said
be
yes.
like we're talking about Grim Wilkins, who
Yes. Yeah.
has done it. I'm just saying for I know but I'm just saying for anybody listening who's like Grim, what are they? Grim, the TV show? Like, for anyone who doesn't know who we're talking about, but Grim Wilkins, he's done a book. He did a book at Image called Miranda. He's currently um this episode will probably come out after it's over, but he's currently doing a Kickstarter for like a new volume of Miranda. And yeah, I have a book that I'm working on with him that's still like in very early stages. It's probably not going to be ready to be published or be on Kickstarter. Who knows what's going to happen? It's probably not going to be ready for quite some time, but that's a perfect example of a guy who just like, you know, it's like an impossible dream that he would even reply to me like, and I don't know. While we're talking about this, like I just want to throw this out there to like anybody who is like self-conscious or whatever. Like they might hear me like talking to you, or they might see like my public persona on Twitter and think that I'm just like an endless, fount of like confidence or whatever. Like, writing a script for Grimm was like extremely scary and intimidating to me. Like this is like this, if the book is bad, it's because I choked, like not because Grimm did bad work. It's because I told him to draw stupid shit that wasn't good, like wasn't playing to his strength. So I'm just
Like he's a
trying to,
writer artist that got an Image book. Like he's fucking awesome.
yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these people, like I really feel it's like a lot of these comic book artists, people are going to hear this and probably make fun of me, but like I really feel it's like some of the greatest artists walking the earth, and they're just like, I don't know, they're, many
No,
of them
I'm
I feel are underappreciated. Like, I don't know.
I get embarrassed like sometimes, like it's so silly that like it, the way I feel about the people I get to work with, like I feel so honored, like
Yeah.
and like I like these like like a lot of these people are like now my friends. Like Adam Phelps like literally sitting in my living room right now. Like we're like, been staying at my house for a few days and like I adore his work. I adored it for like long before I published him. And like, I gotta sit and like look at his unfinished pages. And I'm just like, these guys are so fucking good. And like I gotta, it's such an honor to be like surrounded by this incredible group of creators, and I understand like the little bit of like embarrassment because it's like everyone's too cool for school and they want to just pretend like they don't care, but like we work with some pretty incredible fucking people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm in my head now because I can imagine people listening to this. Like, I can imagine certain people in the comics Twitter world who maybe are a little bit like more cynical than me. Like, they could hear
I,
this and be like, this fucking dork thinks, like, I don't
I
know.
don't care. I feel the
Yeah,
same way. I'm like
I hear you.
it's dorky, but like these guys are so good and I wish they, I'm just grateful that I get to put my logo on the back of their book and, and try to sell it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you think about some of these creators, it's like, I know this is not technically like a stranger's book or whatever. You're just like distributing it, but like Kankor, for instance, it's like you look at this, it's like this guy's a genius,
Him and
Matthew
I
Allison, I'm talking about.
him and I had like a meeting a while ago, just to, like chat about possibility of doing something. And I was like, the fact he was even like, yeah, I'll take a meeting with you. Like, who am I? Like,
Right. Yeah. I mean,
like
I guess it's like what we're talking about is sort of like imposter syndrome, I
it
guess.
is. That's exactly what it is. Like in my eyes, like that Kankor should be like a top seller through Dark Horse. Like,
Definitely. Yeah.
why are you even talking to me about it? Like,
It is
and
bizarre. It's like, has Cancor been published by like Image or any other? It's so weird to me. It's like, if I'm in charge of Image or Dark Horse or whatever, it's like I'm like cutting off my hand to get him to do whatever you want. I don't even
Anything.
care what it is.
Yeah, carte blanche, like whatever.
Like you
And people will
shouldn't
buy
be
it.
pitching to Image. Like Image should be, you know, driving a truck of money up to you. Like, or
And
I
that's
don't,
that's why like when I even had the meeting with Matt, I was just like, the fact you're even he was not like, and by no means was he like humoring this. Like he was very genuine. Like
yeah, he was into it.
yeah, he was it. Like he was, or at least gave me the time of day in a way that was like, wasn't just like, I'll just hear this guy out. Like it, it was fucking awesome. Like I love Matt's work. Like so I don't know. I don't care how dorky it sounds. These, it's not anything I wouldn't say to their face. I'm sure Adam can even hear me right now. I've said it to all of them. There's a reason why all their artwork is on my wall in my office.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm right there with you. Like, you know, I feel a similar way. I guess like I think it's like this kind of thing that we're talking about, I think is very good if you're like a 22-year-old comic book artist, like I think it's good for you to hear this kind of thing that like, you know, you're kind of downplaying like the prominence or importance, I guess, of like strangers as like an emerging like indie publisher or whatever. But like I imagine it like I imagine there might be like a 20-year-old kid out there listening to this who is like intimidated by you. And I think it's like good to hear this kind of thing where it's like the people that you might be intimidated by are just like like are just like idiots just like you. You know what I mean? Not,
I'm
maybe idiots
intimidated
is
by
not
so many
fair, but
artists. Like I'm grateful that like not many people know what I look like because it allows me to like go up to creators and like buy their books without them being like, oh, you're the guy that does strange, like or whatever. Like
right, yeah.
I was at Permanent Damage last weekend. Like I went up to like Lale Westfin's table and like bought a couple things and I was just like, they're so like they're incredible. They're one of the best creators like alive right now and just like it's there is like some I can't remember who it was, but I were like they're like, yeah, I'm a little starstruck. Like Lale's here, like they're amazing. And it's I don't care how corny it sounds, and let Twitter, comics Twitter cynical people like dunk on us, but
Hmm.
they're I love this shit and I don't care. So
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. I mean, I agree. Um, so anyways, comics Twitter, Eddie is antagonizing you openly and
please
directly.
don't.
No,
I've
I'm
I've
kidding.
done
I'm
very good at
kidding.
never engaging with any of it.
um, so I don't know, man. I mean, I could keep talking, but I don't want to keep you forever, you
No,
know.
I gotta it's time for dinner. So it's a good segue to that.
Yeah, definitely. It was great talking to you, man. I mean, people listening to this, like they could find like all the books that Strangers publishes and also like distributes on strangerspublishing.com. Again, this is probably not going to run while it's definitely not going to run while it's going, but you currently have like a Kickstarter for uh Machinophobe, I guess. Is
I think that's how you say it. I've been saying machinophobe, but
okay, I got you.
I have no idea. One of us is right. Both of us are right. Neither of us are right. But yeah, I'm working with again another creator that actually reached out to me, but same thing. Like I was a big fan of his work. Raphael Zeitz, I think is how you pronounce his
So
last
that'll
name.
probably be available like just to buy, I guess, by the time this comes out. Like
Yeah, very likely. The book's finished. It's pretty much going to print as soon as the Kickstarter is finished. So like
probably going to
it
be like on strangerspublishing.com or like
yeah,
you were
by the
talking
time
about
this
before,
happens,
like through Lunar, it'll be available also through that. Like if you're like
yeah,
a comic book store or whatever.
any and all channels, buy from me, buy from a comic shop, probably buy from a comic shop because then they'll want to keep buying stuff from me, which would be extremely cool. So
Is there any stuff I'm forgetting? Like, like do you want to like say like your Twitter handle or your Instagram or anything you want to say to
yeah, I mean, Instagram's strangers underscore publishing, Twitter's strangers underscore zine, because they can't fit publishing in the title. I lucked out. My blue sky is just strangers. I got in early enough where I
Oh,
just have the word. I know I'm pretty
prime real
stoked
estate.
about that. And then I've started doing TikTok where I've just been like sharing like chapters of some of our books on TikTok, which has been kind of interesting
Oh, that's
test.
cool.
Harry Nordlinger has been doing it with some of his strips, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I kind of copied him, and it's just a whole different world. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of on everything. I'm taking any shot I can trying to reach audiences in weird niche places. So, whether it's the Zoomers on TikTok or, the old folks on Facebook, I'm trying it all.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, from my perspective, like I said before, like I think like Strangers is like one of the like, indie publishers to watch. Like I'm
Thank you.
really impressed by what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I loved Holy West. I can't wait
Oh,
for your
thanks,
second
man.
trim. Yeah, I appreciate you talking with me.
Yeah, for sure. It was great talking to you, man.
All right, bud. I'll see you later.